Today we're going to look at Chapter 2, which looks at sociological research. So in Chapter 1, we looked at the difference between sociology and common sense, and we examined the fact that sociology is a science. One of the reasons that sociology is a science is because it uses the scientific method. And the scientific method is a systematic, organized series of steps that ensures maximum objectivity and consistency when researching a problem. So, one of the things that makes sociology a science is that it is a systematic study. It uses these steps. It's different than just simply observing what's going on around us or, using what we think or know to be true. So there's 5 steps in the scientific method, and it says that the scientific method ensures maximum objectivity. So hopefully, as you begin to build and grow your sociological imagination, you're starting to recognize that a lot of the ways that you see things, perceive things, understand things, the knowledge that you have is based on your life experiences. And it's really hard not to allow those things to interfere. So when we use the scientific method, we make a commitment to remain objective and to first recognize that we have all these preconceived ideas and notions and make a commitment really not to let them cloud the research. And it's important too that the results that we get are consistent. So if people are doing similar studies over time and they're getting consistent results, that makes these studies more reliable. So let's look at the different steps of the scientific method. So there's 5 basic steps, and the first step is defining the problem. Clearly state what you hope to investigate, right? So you're going to look at existing theories that are out there about why people think and act the way they do, and say, what exactly do you want to study? Clearly state that out. The next thing you're going to do is review the literature. So you're going to investigate previous research that's conducted by sociologists on the same topic. So where do we find this information? We find it in scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles, and those articles can be found through the Bugs website under the database, in the databases. So we're looking at previous research that's been done, and it's really important to do this because it helps us refine the problem. So in step 1 we define the problem, but in step 2 we're refining the problem, right? So we look at what else is out there and say maybe I want to focus more on this or stay away from that. So it really helps us kind of hone in on what we really want to do. It helps us clarify which design we want to use, how we want to collect this data, and a big reason to use previous literature is to either eliminate or avoid mistakes that somebody else made. So if someone did a similar study and there was this glaring flaw, you want to know about that ahead of time so that you don't make the same mistake. All right, moving on to step 3, we're going to formulate a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is a testable statement about the relationship between 2 or more variables. Right, so we look at, a hypothesis tries to indicate what we think is happening and why. And it has to be very, very testable. You really have to narrow down exactly what do you want to research, what do you want to test here. So if we're looking at, say, the relationship between the amount of time spent studying and the grade that we get on a test, a testable hypothesis would be, if someone spends 3 hours studying, then they will increase their grade by 10 points or 1 letter grade, something that is very testable. We can test at 3 hours. We can examine the results on the test. So making sure that it's something that's very clear, that's very testable. The next thing we want to do is we're going to collect and analyze the data. So before you do that, you have to pick a research design. And we're going to come back to this because we're going to look at the different research designs that are out there. But which research design are we going to use for the study? And then once we pick that, we need to collect the data and then analyze the data. Right. We need to select our sample. So the first thing we're going to do is say, what population do we want to look at? Do we want to look at high school students or high school graduates or college students or elementary school students? We want to look at men, women, people, higher social classes, lower social classes, different religions, things like that. So what is your population? And then from your population, you choose your sample, right? And this is just a selection from a larger population that is statistically representative of that population. And then after you choose your research design, you get your population, you do your research, then you develop your conclusion. And you find out, does the data support the hypothesis? And if it does, great. But if it doesn't, that does not mean that your research is a failure. It just gives you another direction to go in. And we go back to maintaining objectivity. It's really important that you are open-minded, and that if the data doesn't support your hypothesis, that's fine. You can't force it to support your hypothesis. You have to be open about it and just see where it takes you next. So one of the things that's important to look at when we do social research is the difference between correlation and causation. So correlation just means, a relationship between two variables in which a change in one coincides with a change in the other, whereas causation, or causal logic, says that a relationship exists between variables in which change in one actually brings about change in the other. So correlation just means there's a change in one, there's a change in the other, where causation is saying A is actually causing B to happen. And it's really important to distinguish between correlation and causation. So we're going to look at an example of an article that kind of confuses the two. So this is an article that comes from the website The Daily Tech. And here's the headline: study, hypertexting social networking equals sex, drugs, booze, and violence for teens. So they found that teens who, what they call hypertexting, which means teens who text more than 100 or send more than 120 text messages a day, are twice as likely to have tried alcohol, 43% more likely to binge drink, 40% more likely to smoke cigarettes, 41% more likely to try illegal drugs, 3.5 more times likely to have sex, and here's the big kicker: 90% more likely to have sex with 4 or more partners. And this is what grabbed a lot of the headlines. So it was coming off, take your kids' phones away. People who hypertexting causes people to have sex and have sex with multiple partners. But that's not what the study is actually saying. The study did not prove that texting causes people to be promiscuous. It just shows that a change in one coincides with a change with the other, right? That people who text a lot also tend to have more sexual partners. So does it cause it? No. So what is another factor that can be related to both of these variables? It could be the fact that we're dealing with the population of teenagers, right? Teenagers happen to text a lot. Teenagers may be more promiscuous than other age groups in the population, right? So even though we found a correlation, we don't have a causation. And this article is found in the additional resources in Module 2 for Chapter 2. Okay, so let's get back to our major research designs. So we have 4 major research designs, and the first one is surveys. And we've all taken surveys, we've all seen surveys before. For the purpose of this chapter, surveys includes both face-to-face interviews or any type of questionnaires, online or paper questionnaires, that provides researchers with information about how people think and act. If you want to know, why people think or act a certain way, you ask them, and that's what surveys do. Surveys, if we look at online surveys, they're really great because you could reach a large segment of the population, and really easy. It's really cost efficient, and it's time efficient. One of the downsides is that people may not be honest, or they may just not complete them. Whereas interviews are good because you get a lot of information. Face to face, you can ask follow-up questions, you can read body language, all of that. But a downside of interviews is that they actually, take a long time. You need someone to actually interview all these people and transcribe the interviews and gather all the data. So good and bad to both of these, whether you use interviews or questionnaires when you're doing research. Okay. Observation is a good method. This allows researchers to examine certain behaviors in communities they could not investigate through other research techniques. So this is sort of like infiltrating a community or going underground in a community. And a lot of times it's used with communities that are subcultures that you may not be able to get information from elsewhere. So drug dealers or gang members or prostitutes, homeless people, going and asking people to fill out a survey may not be the best way to gather information about these subcultures. So observation really allows you to get an insider view. You're going to get some really raw, good data from doing this that you cannot obtain anywhere else. there's two, main downsides of it though, is one is that it's hard not to kind of lose yourself in it and lose your perspective. And the other one is we're talking years and years of living within a community in order to get really this raw data. Experiments is our next research design, and this is an artificially created situation that allows a researcher to manipulate variables, right? So this is really the only research design where we can actually prove causation. If I do A, this causes B to happen. We're going to, as the course progresses, look at some really classic experiments in the fields of psychology and sociology. And for those of you who have taken these courses prior, we're going to look at Stanley Milgram's electric shock experiment and the Stanford prison experiments, really classic experiments when we talk about these two fields of study, and what they look like. Something that's important to be careful of when you're doing experiments is what's called the Hawthorne effect. And this is where the fact that people are being studied and they know that they're being studied could actually skew your results. So we always have to be careful about the unintended influence that occurs when people know that they are being experimented on. And our fourth research design would be use of existing sources. And this usually takes place in the form of secondary analysis. So you're looking at previously collected and publicly accessible information and data. Don't recreate the wheel, right? So two good examples of secondary analysis is the US Census and the UCR, which is the Uniform Crime Report. This is information that's out there that's already been gathered. And we could use this information to find out, who lives in this country, what the demographics are, race, ethnicity. We look at Uniform Crime Report, where crimes are being committed, what time of crimes are being committed. Although there is, we'll get to that. The main advantage is that this information is out there, the work's already been done for you, and most of the information is, free and readily accessible. The down part is that you're relying on work that somebody else did. And we don't know if it was used for the same purposes or if it's completely accurate, if the information can be skewed, which is something that comes up with the Uniform Crime Report. So these are our major research designs, and a lot of time when we're doing research, we use a combination of them. We start using existing sources, and then maybe we want to interview we want to send out a survey, and then maybe you want to interview some people based on the survey. So a lot of times you use more than one research design in conducting social research.